bear cub was locked in a freezer truck. What this baby did was shocking. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The small town of Pine Hollow sat nestled between ancient forest and rolling mountains, a place where the wilderness and human world existed in delicate balance. Gray clouds hung low in the sky as a chill wind swept through the quiet streets. At the edge of town, Mara Winters gazed out her kitchen window, absently watching her 8-month-old daughter, Lily, play on a soft blanket in the living room. Lily's tiny hands grabbed at colorful wooden blocks, her innocent laughter filling the modest cabin with warmth despite the gloomy weather outside. Outside, beyond Mara's view, a delivery truck hummed loudly as it backed up to Garson's general store. The large refrigerated vehicle had arrived from the city, bringing weekly supplies to the remote town. 3 workers unloaded boxes of frozen goods, their breath visible in the cold air. The youngest worker, Dominic, paused as movement caught his eye near the edge of the forest. A small bear cub, no bigger than a large house cat, wandered hesitantly from between the trees, its dark eyes wide with curiosity. "Hey guys, look at that," Dominic called to his co-workers, Trevor and Hank. The men stopped their work, watching as the cub sniffed cautiously at a stack of wooden pallets. Trevor frowned. "Where's its mother?" "Bear cubs don't usually wander alone." Hank snorted, tossing a cigarette to the ground. "Probably hunting. Let's finish up quick before Mama Bear decides to join the party." But Dominic couldn't take his eyes off the cub. Its fur was matted in places, and it moved with an uncertain gait. "It looks hungry," he said, pulling a sandwich from his pocket. Without thinking, he tossed half toward the cub. The small bear startled, then cautiously approached the food, sniffing before taking a tentative bite. "Are you crazy?" Trevor hissed. "You can't feed wild animals." But Dominic wasn't listening. A strange idea had taken root in his mind, a thoughtless whim that would soon spiral into something terrible. "I wonder what Mr. Garson would pay to have a bear cub. That old taxidermist in Riverton would give a fortune." "Don't even think about it," Trevor warned. But Dominic was already moving, sandwich in hand, luring the hungry cub closer to the truck. Inside her home, Mara felt a strange prickle at the back of her neck. Lily had suddenly gone quiet, her blocks forgotten as she stared out the window, tiny brows furrowed as if listening for something only she could hear. Mara followed her daughter's gaze, but saw only the back of the delivery truck, its refrigeration unit humming steadily. At the store, Dominic had managed to coax the bear cub close enough to grab. The frightened animal squirmed and made small, desperate sounds as he lifted it by the scruff of its neck. "Open the truck," he ordered Hank. "This is insane," Hank muttered. But the excitement of Dominic's recklessness had infected him too. He swung open the heavy freezer door. Cold air billowed out as Dominic tossed the cub inside, quickly slamming the door shut. The cub's terrified cries were instantly muffled by the thick metal walls. "Are you out of your mind?" Trevor's face had gone pale. "That's cruel. And what about its mother?" "Relax," Dominic laughed, though there was an edge of uncertainty in his voice. "We'll be gone before she shows up, and the cold will just calm it down until we figure out what to do with it." Inside the freezer truck, the temperature plummeted around the tiny bear. Its paws scrabbled frantically against the icy metal door, its cries growing weaker as the bitter cold seeped into its small body. The cub had never known such cold. Not even the harshest winter night compared to this artificial freeze that numbed its paws and frosted its fur. Back in her cabin, Lily suddenly let out a strange, distressed sound. Not her usual cry for food or comfort, but something primal and urgent. She pushed herself up on unsteady legs, a feat she had only recently mastered, and took wobbling steps toward the window, her small hands pressed against the glass. Mara watched in amazement. "What is it, sweetie?" she asked, following her daughter's intense gaze toward the delivery truck. For a moment, she could have sworn she heard something. A faint, desperate cry that didn't sound human. Lily turned to her mother, her eyes filled with a wisdom that seemed impossible for a child so young. Then, while Mara was distracted by a knock at the front door, Lily did something she had never done before. She toddled to the partially open back door and slipped outside, drawn by an instinct she couldn't possibly understand, toward a suffering she somehow sensed in the cold metal truck beyond. The air outside was biting against Lily's soft skin, but she didn't cry or turn back. Small puffs of breath escaped her lips as she made her way across the yard. Her tiny fingers curled into determined fists. Something was pulling her forward. A connection she couldn't comprehend but felt with every fiber of her being. Each unsteady step brought her closer to the source of the distress call that only she seemed able to hear. The knock at Mara's door was from Eleanor Blackwood, an elderly woman who had lived in Pine Hollow her entire life. Eleanor's wiry gray hair was tucked beneath a worn knit cap, and her eyes, though clouded with age, still held the sharp intelligence that had made her the town's unofficial historian and keeper of its secrets. "Mara, dear," Eleanor said urgently as she stepped inside, not bothering with pleasantries. "Have you seen anything unusual today? Any wildlife near the house?" Mara shook her head, confused by the old woman's intensity. "No, nothing." "Why do you ask?" Eleanor moved to the window, her gnarled hands clutching the sill as she peered out toward the forest edge. The diamond heart bear was spotted near town this morning. She's searching for her cub. "Diamond heart?" Mara asked, accepting a cup of tea from the woman who had become something of a grandmother figure since she'd moved to Pine Hollow last year after her husband's death. "A special bear," Eleanor explained, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "The locals have never hunted her family. Some say they're protectors of this valley. They have a white diamond marking on their chest, and they've never harmed a human in all the years I've been alive." The old woman's face darkened. "But a mother separated from her cub, that's different. That's dangerous for everyone." Mara nodded, thinking of her own fierce protectiveness toward Lily. She turned to point out her daughter playing on the floor, but the spot where Lily had been sitting was empty. The wooden blocks lay abandoned on the blanket. "Lily?" Mara called, a cold fear gripping her heart. "Lily, where are you, sweetie?" The back door stood ajar, swinging slightly in the breeze. "Oh, no," Mara gasped, rushing toward the door with Eleanor close behind. Outside, the gray day had darkened further as storm clouds gathered above the mountains. And there, halfway across the yard, was tiny Lily, her unsteady legs carrying her with surprising determination toward Garson's store and the humming refrigeration truck. Meanwhile, at the store's loading dock, an argument had broken out among the delivery workers. Trevor, the oldest of the three, was becoming increasingly agitated about the cub locked in the freezer truck. "This isn't right, Dominic," he insisted, glancing nervously at the forest edge. "That cub is suffering in there, and its mother could be anywhere. Bears can smell their young from miles away." Dominic scoffed, though sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cold day. "Don't be dramatic. We'll be gone in 20 minutes and Garson will never know. I've got a buddy in Riverton who'll pay good money for a live cub." "You're talking about poaching now," Hank said quietly, his earlier bravado fading as the reality of their situation sank in. "That's federal time if we're caught." Inside the freezer truck, the bear cub's cries had weakened to pitiful whimpers. Its small body trembled violently as frost formed on its whiskers and the tips of its ears. The cub curled into a tight ball, instinctively trying to conserve heat, but the freezing metal floor sapped its warmth relentlessly. In its confusion and fear, the cub summoned what little strength remained and released a desperate, high-pitched wail, a sound that would normally call its mother. This final cry, though muffled by the truck's thick walls, somehow reached baby Lily as she toddled across the damp grass. She paused, her face scrunching up as if she might cry, but instead she made a strange responding sound, almost a perfect mimicry of the bear cub's call. Deep in the forest, the diamond heart bear froze. Her powerful head lifted, ears swiveling toward Pine Hollow. She had been searching frantically for hours, following her cub's scent until it mysteriously disappeared near the human settlement. Now, impossibly, she heard her cub's call, but it came from a human voice. The great bear's muscles tensed as she turned toward the town, toward her missing child, and began to move with terrible purpose. At the loading dock, Trevor had stepped away to speak with Mr. Garson inside the store, torn between loyalty to his co-workers and his growing horror at their actions. Dominic and Hank continued transferring boxes, trying to work faster now, both men glancing repeatedly toward the tree line. "How long has that kid been standing there?" Hank suddenly asked, his voice tight with alarm. Dominic turned to see little Lily, barely standing on her own, watching them from the edge of the loading area. Her wispy hair blew in the cold wind, and her blue eyes seemed to stare straight through them. "Where did she come from?" Dominic muttered, looking around for the child's parents. "Hey, kid, you shouldn't be out here. It's dangerous." Lily didn't respond to his words. Instead, she took another wobbly step forward, then another, her small face set with determination as she moved directly toward the freezer truck. "This is all we need," Hank groaned. "Some lost kid wandering around. Grab her before she hurts herself." Dominic moved to intercept the toddler, but something about her steady gaze made him hesitate. In that moment of indecision, Lily reached the truck and pressed her tiny hand against its cold metal surface, directly over the spot where, inside, the bear cub lay shivering. And then Lily did something truly shocking, something that made both men freeze in disbelief. She opened her mouth and let out a perfect, haunting imitation of a bear cub's call for its mother. The sound echoed across the quiet town, carried by the wind toward the dark forest beyond, and from those shadowy depths came an answering roar that made the blood drain from Dominic's face, a sound of rage, of determination, of a mother who had found her child's trail at last. "What the hell was that?" Hank whispered, his voice barely audible as he stared at the child before them. "How did she—" Dominic couldn't answer. His mind reeled as he tried to process what he'd just witnessed. A baby, hardly old enough to walk, mimicking the exact call of a bear cub. Not just any call, but the specific distress cry of the very cub they had locked away. It was impossible, uncanny, almost supernatural. In that moment of stunned silence, they heard running footsteps approaching. Mara burst around the corner of the building, her face pale with fear, Eleanor Blackwood hobbling quickly behind her. "Lily!" Mara cried, rushing toward her daughter. "Oh my God, what are you doing out here?" But as she reached for her child, Lily let out another perfect bear cub call, louder this time, more urgent. The sound froze everyone in place, and even Mara stepped back in shock, her hands trembling as she stared at her daughter. "That's not possible," she whispered. Eleanor pushed forward, her weathered face grave. "The diamond heart cub," she said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. "Where is it?" When neither worker answered, Eleanor's eyes narrowed, fixing on the freezer truck. Understanding dawned on her face, followed by horror. "You didn't?" "We don't know what you're talking about, lady," Dominic said, finding his voice at last, though it shook with poorly concealed fear. Eleanor ignored him, turning instead to the child. "Lily," she said gently, kneeling with difficulty beside the toddler, "show us where the baby bear is." To everyone's amazement, Lily turned and patted the freezer truck door, her small face solemn. "Open it," Eleanor commanded, rising to her feet with newfound strength. "Open it now, before her mother gets here and tears this whole town apart looking for her cub." Another roar sounded from the forest edge, closer now. Trevor emerged from the store with Mr. Garson, both men alarmed by the commotion. "What in God's name is happening out here?" Garson demanded, his bushy eyebrows drawn together in confusion. Before anyone could answer, the ground seemed to shake with heavy running footsteps. From around the side of the building appeared a sight that stole the breath from every witness: the diamond heart bear, massive and magnificent, her dark fur gleaming even in the dull light, the white diamond on her chest stark against her powerful form. She skidded to a halt at the edge of the loading dock, her eyes wild with maternal fury, her teeth bared in a snarl that promised death to whoever had taken her child. For one terrible moment no one moved. The bear's gaze swept over the frozen humans, nostrils flaring as she sought her cub's scent. Then, impossibly, her eyes fixed on tiny Lily, the source of her cub's call. What happened next would be told and retold in Pine Hollow for generations. Little Lily, with no trace of fear, took a stumbling step toward the enormous predator and again imitated the cub's cry, but this time she added something new. Her tiny hand reached out and patted the freezer truck door. Then she looked back at the bear mother as if saying, "Your baby is in here." The diamond heart bear huffed, her massive head tilting slightly as she watched the human child. Then, with deliberate slowness, she approached, not Lily, but the truck door. "Nobody move," Eleanor whispered urgently. "Nobody make a sound." The bear sniffed at the truck's door, then let out a low, mournful sound as she recognized her cub's scent. She began to scratch at the metal, her powerful claws leaving deep gouges, but unable to breach the heavy door. "We have to open it," Mara said suddenly, stepping forward despite the danger. "That cub will die in there, and then she'll kill us all." "Are you insane?" Dominic hissed. "That's a wild bear?" "That's a mother," Mara replied sharply, "and you stole her child." Her eyes flashed with a protective fury that matched the bear's. "Open the door, or I'll do it myself." Mr. Garson, his face ashen, moved slowly toward the truck controls. "Stand back," he warned, "all of you." As the store owner reached for the release mechanism, the diamond heart bear turned her attention to him, sensing his intent. For a breathless moment their eyes met, human and wild animal, connected by the universal thread of a parent's love. Then the bear stepped back, just enough to allow Garson to reach the door handle. With a hiss of escaping cold air, the freezer door swung open. Inside, barely visible among the frost-covered boxes, lay the small form of the bear cub, its fur dusted with ice crystals, its tiny body curled into a tight, trembling ball. For one terrible moment no one moved. The cub was so still that everyone feared the worst. Even the diamond heart bear seemed frozen, her eyes fixed on her motionless child. Then, before anyone could stop her, Lily broke free from her mother's grasp. With perfect innocence and impossible courage, the toddler wobbled into the freezer truck. A collective gasp rose from the onlookers, but no one dared move for fear of provoking the bear mother. "Lily, no!" Mara whispered desperately, her heart hammering in her chest. Inside the truck, Lily approached the shivering cub. She reached out and placed her warm, tiny hand on the bear's frost-covered fur. At her touch, the cub's eyes fluttered open, dazed, confused, but alive. Lily made a soft cooing sound, not a bear call this time, but a human sound of comfort and reassurance. The cub responded with a weak whimper, trying to lift its head. Lily, with the simple logic of a child, sat down beside the cub and wrapped her arms around its cold body, pressing her warmth against the freezing animal. Outside the truck, the diamond heart bear let out a low rumble, not of threat, but of distress. She took a tentative step toward the truck, her massive paws moving with surprising delicacy as she approached the open door. "She's going to kill my baby," Mara moaned, starting forward only to be held back by Eleanor's surprisingly strong grip. "No," the old woman said with quiet certainty. "Watch." The bear paused at the threshold of the truck, her enormous frame blocking the light. Inside, Lily looked up without fear, still cradling the cub against her. Then, with deliberate movements, the child began to rock slightly, humming a tune that Mara recognized as the lullaby she sang to Lily each night. In that surreal moment, as a human child comforted a bear cub with a lullaby, something extraordinary happened. The diamond heart bear entered the truck with cautious steps, her claws clicking against the metal floor. She approached the intertwined forms of the children, one human, one bear, and lowered her massive head to sniff her cub. The cub stirred at its mother's familiar scent, letting out a weak but joyful cry. But remarkably, it didn't pull away from Lily. Instead, it seemed to press closer to her warmth while reaching for its mother. With infinite gentleness, the bear mother nuzzled her cub. Then, to the astonishment of everyone watching, she carefully licked Lily's face, a gesture of gratitude so profound that tears sprang to Mara's eyes. "I don't believe what I'm seeing," Trevor whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Dominic stood silent, shame washing over him as he witnessed the consequences of his cruelty, transformed by a child's compassion. The bear cub might have died, would have died, if not for Lily's inexplicable connection and courage. Inside the truck, the bear mother now lay down beside her cub and the human child who had somehow saved it. Her massive body created a protective semicircle around both little ones, and as the humans watched in wonder, Lily reached out to pat the mother bear's nose with the same fearless innocence she'd shown throughout this impossible encounter. "We need to get Lily out of there," Mara said, her voice steadier now but still filled with maternal concern. "Wait," Eleanor counseled. "Let the diamond heart make the next move. This is sacred ground now." No one argued with the old woman's words. They all sensed the truth in them, that they were witnessing something beyond ordinary understanding, something that connected to the ancient relationship between humans and the wild creatures with whom they shared the earth. For several long minutes, they waited in respectful silence. The cub gradually showed signs of warming, its movements becoming stronger as it pressed against both Lily and its mother. Then, with careful deliberation, the diamond heart bear rose to her feet. She gently nudged her cub, who struggled to stand on wobbling legs. What happened next would become the most debated and wondered at part of the story for years to come. The bear mother took her cub gently in her mouth, lifting it as any mother bear would. But before turning to leave, she used her massive head to gently nudge Lily toward the truck entrance, toward her human mother. Lily, seemingly understanding perfectly, patted the bear's fur once more before toddling to the edge of the truck. Mara rushed forward, tears streaming down her face, and swept her daughter into her arms. "Thank you," she whispered to the bear, the words inadequate but heartfelt. The diamond heart bear regarded the human mother and child for a long moment, her intelligent eyes reflecting something that transcended the divide between their species. Then, with her cub secure in her jaws, she turned and descended from the truck with dignity. No one moved or spoke as the magnificent creature padded across the loading dock. The bear paused briefly beside Dominic, who stood rigid with fear. She turned her head toward him, and their eyes met in a moment of reckoning that made the young man tremble. There was judgment in that gaze, but also something unexpected. Mercy. The bear could have struck him down with a single blow of her massive paw, but she chose not to. Instead, she huffed once, a sound that seemed to carry all the weight of her wisdom and forgiveness, before continuing on her way. At the edge of the forest, the Diamond Heart Bear stopped and turned back one last time. She carefully set her cub down on the ground, where it stood on shaky legs, the white diamond marking on its chest now visible to all. The mother bear made a soft sound, and to everyone's amazement the cub turned and called back toward the humans, the exact call that Lily had somehow learned to mimic. "She's saying goodbye," Eleanor whispered, her weathered face wet with tears. Lily, still held tight in her mother's arms, lifted her tiny hand and waved. Then, to the continued astonishment of everyone present, she made the bear call one final time. Not a distress signal now, but a different tone, one that sounded almost like gratitude. The mother bear and her cub watched for a moment longer, then turned and disappeared into the shelter of the ancient forest. As the spell of the moment gradually lifted, Mr. Garson was the first to speak. "I've lived in these mountains my entire life," he said, his voice unsteady, "and I've never seen anything like that. Never even heard stories of anything like that." "I have," Eleanor said quietly, her eyes still fixed on the spot where the bears had vanished. "My grandmother told tales of the Diamond Heart Bears and the special children who could speak to them. I always thought they were just stories." She turned to look at Lily with newfound respect. "But the old ways remember, even when we forget." Dominic stood apart from the others, his face ashen. I almost killed that cub," he said, the words catching in his throat. "And that baby saved it when I—" He couldn't continue, overcome by the weight of what had nearly happened because of his thoughtlessness. Trevor placed a hand on the younger man's shoulder, not in forgiveness, but in recognition of the lesson learned. "You'll have to answer for this," he said grimly. "Poaching is a serious crime." "I'll go to the authorities myself," Dominic responded, straightening his shoulders. "I won't run from what I did." Mara, still clutching Lily close to her heart, approached them. The young mother's face was tear-streaked but composed, her eyes clear and determined as she addressed Dominic. "What matters now is that you understand," she said. "Everything is connected. We're all responsible for each other, humans, animals, the whole world. That's what Lily showed us today." As if in confirmation, Lily reached out a small hand and touched Dominic's cheek in a gesture of innocent forgiveness that broke something open inside the young man. He began to weep quietly, nodding in acknowledgement of a truth he could find no words for. The group made their way back toward the store, each person forever changed by what they had witnessed. Thunder rumbled in the distance as the gray clouds finally released their burden, gentle rain beginning to fall over Pine Hollow. "It's washing everything clean," Eleanor observed, her face turned up to the sky. "A new beginning." Ray Oswald, who had slept through the entire extraordinary encounter, emerged from the truck cabin, stretching and yawning. "Did I miss anything?" he asked, completely unaware of the miracle that had unfolded just yards away. Mr. Garson laughed, a sound that released some of the tension they all still carried. "Ray, you wouldn't believe us if we told you." As they reached the store, Mara paused and looked down at her daughter. Lily's eyes were heavy with exhaustion from her incredible adventure, but she seemed content, as if she had done exactly what she had been meant to do. Perhaps she had. Perhaps some children came into the world with gifts beyond our understanding, bridges between humans and the wild things we have grown too distant from. "Let's go home, my brave girl," Mara whispered, kissing her daughter's forehead. "You've done enough impossible things for one day." Lily's only response was a sleepy smile and a soft sound, not quite human, not quite bear, a sound that seemed to belong to some language older than either. That night, as a gentle rain continued to fall over Pine Hollow, locals reported hearing bear calls that sounded unusually melodic, almost like singing. Some swore they could make out a pattern in the calls, a conversation between the forest and the town. Others dismissed it as imagination heightened by the strange events at Garson's store, which were already spreading through the community in whispers of wonder. In Mara's cabin, Lily slept peacefully, her dreams filled with images only she would remember, of cold metal and warm fur, of a language without words, of a connection that defied explanation. Mara sat by her daughter's bedside long into the night, watching the rise and fall of her small chest, wondering at the miracle she had witnessed and the extraordinary child she had been blessed with. "What are you, my little one?" she whispered, stroking Lily's soft hair. "What other wonders are you hiding inside that heart of yours?" As if in answer, Lily stirred in her sleep and made a soft sound, half-human sigh, half-bear murmur, before settling back into dreams. Miles away, in the depths of the forest, the diamond-heart bear tended to her cub, licking the last traces of frost from its fur as it nursed, regaining strength with each passing hour. The great bear's mind held no human thoughts, no words as we know them, but she carried an awareness, a memory of tiny hands and fearless eyes, of warmth freely given when it was most needed. That memory would remain, passed somehow from mother to cub, becoming part of the complex legacy of the diamond heart bears and their unusual relationship with the humans of Pine Hollow. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the storm having cleansed the air of tension. Eleanor Blackwood arrived early at Mara's cabin, carrying an old leather-bound book tucked carefully under her arm. Her eyes were bright with purpose as Mara welcomed her inside. "I found it," the old woman said without preamble, setting the book gently on the kitchen table. "My grandmother's journal. I stayed up all night looking for it." Her gnarled fingers carefully opened the aged cover, revealing pages filled with faded handwriting and simple sketches. "There," she said, pointing to a drawing of a child and a bear cub, standing face to face with a strange symbol between them. "What is this?" Mara asked, leaning closer. "The old stories," Eleanor replied, her voice hushed with reverence, "about the speaker children. Children born with the ability to bridge the gap between human and animal minds. My grandmother wrote that they appear once in a generation, usually in times of great change or need." She turned to look at Lily, who was playing contentedly on her blanket. "I believe your daughter is one of them." Mara sank into a chair, her thoughts spinning. "But how? Why Lily?" Eleanor shook her head. "Those aren't questions with easy answers. But I can tell you this, in all the stories, the speaker children bring healing. They remind us of connections we've forgotten, of responsibilities we've neglected." She closed the book carefully. "Your daughter did something miraculous yesterday. She saved not just that cub, but perhaps all of us. The Diamond Heart Bears have protected this valley for generations. If that cub had died—" She left the thought unfinished. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. It was Sheriff Collins, his weathered face solemn as he removed his hat. "Morning, Mara, Eleanor." He nodded to both women. I need to talk to you about what happened yesterday. Got some reports that are—" He searched for the right word. Unusual, to say the least. "Come in, Sheriff," Mara said, pouring him a cup of coffee. "It's all true, whatever you heard." "Even the part about your baby talking to bears?" he asked skeptically, accepting the coffee with a nod of thanks. Before Mara could respond, Lily let out a perfect imitation of a bear's greeting call. The same sound the Diamond Heart Bear had made when she set her cub down at the forest's edge. Sheriff Collins nearly dropped his cup, his eyes widening as he stared at the innocent child on the floor. "Good Lord," he whispered. "Now, do you believe?" Eleanor asked, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. The sheriff ran a hand through his thinning hair. "I've got Dominic Carter down at the station," he said after a moment. "He came in at dawn, turned himself in for poaching, endangering a protected species, and a whole list of other charges. Kept talking about a baby who saved a bear cub and how he needs to make things right." He shook his head in wonder. "Never seen anything like it." The man's completely transformed. "People change when they witness a miracle," Eleanor said simply. "What will happen to him?" Mara asked, feeling strangely concerned for the young man who had nearly caused such tragedy. A moment later, her worst fears were confirmed as a gunshot cracked through the night air, followed by another, and then a third. "No!" Mara gasped, instinctively clutching Lily tighter. The child's face crumpled in distress, and she let out a keening sound that was neither human nor bear, but something hauntingly in between, a cry of grief and fear that seemed to pierce the very air. Eleanor's gnarled hand gripped Mara's arm. "We don't know what happened," she said urgently. "Don't assume the worst." But Lily knew. Even as the echo of the gunshots faded, she began to sob, deep, heartbroken cries that shook her tiny frame. She made the Diamond Heart's call, over and over, but there was no answering sound from the forest. "I have to see," Mara decided, her voice tight with fear. "I have to know what's happened." Eleanor nodded grimly. "I'll stay with Lily. You go." But Lily would not be left behind. When Mara tried to hand her to Eleanor, she clung to her mother with surprising strength, her tear-streaked face set with determination. "All right," Mara relented, knowing in her heart that her daughter had as much right as anyone to know the fate of the bears she had connected with so profoundly. "We'll all go. But we stay together, and at the first sign of danger, we run. Understood?" They made their way carefully through the darkened forest, following a narrow trail that led toward Victor's property. The night had grown unusually quiet, as if the forest itself was holding its breath in the aftermath of violence. As they approached the edge of Victor's land, they could see lights through the trees, flashlights bobbing and the harsh glare of portable floodlights illuminating a clearing ahead. Voices carried through the darkness. Men shouting instructions, the rumble of an engine, and one voice rising above the others with sharp authority. Victor Blackwood. They crept closer, staying within the shelter of the trees. The scene that came into view made Mara's blood run cold. In the center of the clearing stood a large metal cage mounted on a trailer hitched to a pickup truck. Inside, pacing in frantic circles, was the adolescent bear they had been searching for. It appeared unharmed but terrified, occasionally standing on its hind legs to slam its weight against the cage bars. Several men moved around the clearing, rough-looking individuals Mara didn't recognize, likely the professional trappers Victor had hired. Sheriff Collins was there too, his face set in a mask of controlled fury, as he argued with Victor, who stood smugly beside the cage. But what drew Mara's eyes, what made her heart stop in her chest, was the dark form lying motionless at the edge of the clearing. "No," she whispered, feeling Eleanor stiffen beside her. The diamond heart bear lay on her side, blood darkening her magnificent fur. She wasn't moving. Lily made a small, broken sound of recognition, then buried her face against her mother's neck, unable to look at the fallen bear. Mara wanted to shield her daughter from the sight, to run back into the forest and pretend they hadn't seen this terrible thing, but she knew that wasn't possible. Lily had already felt the loss, had known the moment the shots were fired what had happened. "Stay here," Eleanor whispered, her voice rough with emotion. "Let me get closer. I need to hear what they're saying." Before Mara could object, the old woman was moving with surprising stealth along the tree line, drawing closer to where Sheriff Collins and Victor continued their heated exchange. "This is murder, Victor," Sheriff Collins was saying, his voice carrying clearly through the night air. "That bear wasn't threatening anyone. She was just trying to reach her family member." Victor's response was cool, controlled. "That bear charged my men, Sheriff. We had the legal right to defend ourselves. It's all perfectly documented." He gestured to one of the trappers, who held up a smartphone, presumably containing video evidence. "Convenient," the sheriff growled. "Just like your tourists' bear attack was convenient." Victor spread his hands in a gesture of innocence. "The law is on my side here, Sheriff. We have a valid permit to trap the bear, and we used appropriate force when threatened. Now, unless you intend to arrest me based on your personal opinions rather than legal facts, I suggest you step aside and let us finish our work." "And what work would that be?" Sheriff Collins asked, his hand resting meaningfully on his holster. Victor smiled, a predatory expression that chilled Mara even from a distance. "Why, conservation, of course. This young specimen is quite valuable for breeding and research. My wildlife center will provide it with the best of care." "In a cage," the sheriff said flatly. "In a controlled environment," Victor corrected smoothly, "where the public can learn to appreciate these magnificent creatures without risk." One of the trappers approached Victor, speaking in a low voice that didn't carry to where Mara watched. Victor frowned, then nodded sharply. "Pack up," he ordered the men. "We're moving out tonight." "You can't transport that bear without proper Wildlife Department authorization," Sheriff Collins objected. Victor produced a folded document from his jacket pocket. "Emergency transport permit," he said smugly. "Applied for it at the same time as the trapping permit. Always best to be prepared, don't you think?" The sheriff's face darkened with fury, but Mara could see that he was trapped by the very laws he had sworn to uphold. Victor had somehow managed to make his despicable actions technically legal. Eleanor had heard enough. She began making her way back to Mara, her face grim in the faint light filtering through the trees. "They're taking the young bear tonight," she whispered when she reached them, "and Victor has ordered them to skin the diamond heart for her pelt." Mara felt sick with horror and rage. "We can't let them do this," she said, her voice shaking. "There has to be something we can do." In her arms, Lily had gone very still, her sobbing quieted to a strange, focused silence. Then, without warning, the child began to make a sound. Not the diamond heart's call this time, but something different, more complex. It started soft but grew in strength and clarity, a vocalization unlike anything Mara had heard before. "Lily, hush," she whispered urgently, afraid Victor's men would hear. "We need to be quiet, baby." But Lily would not be silenced. Her call continued, rising and falling in what seemed almost like a song, a lament, perhaps, or a summoning. And as the sound carried through the night air, something extraordinary happened. From the depths of the forest all around them came answering calls, not just from bears, but from wolves, from owls, from creatures Mara couldn't even identify. a chorus of wild voices rising in response to Lily's call, growing louder and more numerous with each passing second. In the clearing, the men froze, their faces registering confusion that quickly turned to alarm as the cacophony of animal sounds surrounded them. "What the hell is that?" one of the trappers asked, his hand moving nervously to the rifle slung across his back. Victor's face had paled, his eyes darting toward the dark forest. "Finish loading the bear," he ordered sharply. "Now!" But before the men could comply, dark shapes began to materialize at the forest edge all around the clearing. Bears, more than Mara had ever seen in one place. 6, 8, a dozen bears of various sizes, each with the distinctive white diamond marking on their chest. The entire Diamond Heart clan had come, called by Lily's voice. And they were not alone. Wolves slipped between the trees, their eyes gleaming in the artificial light. Owls perched on branches overhead, their silent forms barely visible, but their presence undeniable. Even a mountain lion appeared, its tawny body sleek and dangerous as it crouched at the forest's edge. "My God," Sheriff Collins breathed, taking an involuntary step backward. Victor's men clustered together, raising their weapons as the animals continued to emerge from the darkness. "Don't shoot," Victor commanded, his voice cracking with fear. "Hold your fire." Even in his greed and cruelty, he was smart enough to recognize that opening fire on this gathering would result in a massacre. Not of the animals, but of the humans who had dared to kill one of their own. From her hiding place at the forest's edge, Mara watched in awe as the animals continued to gather, forming a living barrier around the clearing. Lily had gone quiet now, her small face serious as she observed what her call had summoned. There was something ancient and knowing in her expression, a wisdom far beyond her 15 months. "Eleanor," Mara whispered, "what's happening?" The old woman's eyes shone with tears in the dim light. "The old stories," she murmured. "They said that in times of great need, a speaker child could call all the creatures of the forest to stand as one. I never truly believed." Her voice trailed off as she watched the incredible scene unfolding before them. In the clearing, Victor's bravado was crumbling. The trappers huddled together, their weapons raised, but their faces showing the primal fear of men who suddenly realized they were not the apex predators they had believed themselves to be. "Get in the trucks," Victor ordered, his voice strained. "We're leaving, now." "What about the bear?" one of the men asked, gesturing toward the cage where the adolescent Diamond Heart still paced. "Leave it," Victor snapped. "We can come back for it tomorrow when this, whatever this is, has passed." Sheriff Collins stood his ground, his hand still resting on his holstered weapon but his posture now more protective than threatening. "You're not going anywhere, Victor," he said firmly. "Not until the Wildlife Department arrives to sort this mess out." Victor's face contorted with fury. "You can't hold us here, surrounded by wild animals. That's endangerment." "I'm not holding you here," the sheriff replied calmly. "I'm simply not letting you leave a crime scene. That bear," he pointed to the fallen Diamond Heart, "was shot without proper cause. I'll be pressing for a full investigation." As the men argued, something unexpected happened. One of the Diamond Heart bears, an older female with graying fur around her muzzle, detached from the group and approached the fallen form of the great bear. The elderly bear sniffed at the motionless body, then made a soft, mournful sound that seemed to ripple through the assembled creatures. Then, to the astonishment of everyone watching, the old bear began to lick the wounds of the fallen Diamond Heart, her massive tongue working with gentle persistence over the bloodied fur. "What's it doing?" one of the trappers asked, his voice hushed with reluctant wonder. No one answered, all eyes fixed on the strange ministrations of the elderly bear. Minutes passed in tense silence, the only sound the soft lapping of the bear's tongue and the occasional shuffling of the other animals as they maintained their vigil. Then, impossibly, miraculously, the diamond heart bear's side rose and fell in a shallow breath. "She's alive," Mara gasped, hope surging through her. Lily made a small sound of joy, reaching out with her tiny hands as if to touch the bears from a distance. The elderly bear continued her treatment, now joined by two others who approached cautiously, each taking a position around the wounded matriarch. They worked in concert, their massive bodies moving with surprising delicacy as they attended to their fallen leader. "They're treating her wounds," Eleanor whispered in awe. "Bears have compounds in their saliva that promote healing. They're trying to save her." In the clearing, Victor's patience had reached its limit. "This is ridiculous," he snarled, striding toward one of the trucks. "I'm not standing around while a bunch of bears play doctor. We're leaving, Sheriff, and you can't legally stop us." But as Victor reached for the truck door, a massive form detached from the forest's edge, the largest black bear Mara had ever seen. A male by his size, with the white diamond marking gleaming like a star on his chest. The enormous bear moved with deliberate steps to block Victor's path, rising to his full height with a low growl that seemed to vibrate the very air. Victor froze, his face draining of color as he found himself eye to eye with over 600 pounds of clearly angry bear. The animal's breath clouded in the cool night air, washing over Victor's face as the man stood paralyzed with terror. "Don't move," Sheriff Collins advised quietly, his own hand now carefully away from his weapon. "Just back away slowly." For once, Victor seemed inclined to take someone else's advice. He began to inch backward, his eyes never leaving the massive bear that continued to watch him with what could only be described as personal animosity. As the standoff continued, the sound of approaching vehicles broke the tense silence. Headlights appeared on the access road, and moments later, 3 official-looking SUVs pulled into the clearing. Dr. Chen emerged from the lead vehicle, her expression shifting from professional composure to open shock as she took in the extraordinary scene before her. "What in God's name?" she began, her scientific mind clearly struggling to process what she was seeing. Behind her, several wildlife officers poured from the other vehicles, similarly frozen in disbelief at the gathering of normally solitary predators standing in apparent cooperation around the clearing. "Dr. Chen," Sheriff Collins called, relief evident in his voice. "We have a situation here." The wildlife biologist approached cautiously, her eyes darting between the assembled animals, the caged bear, and the wounded diamond heart still being tended by her family members. "I can see that," she said with remarkable understatement. "Would someone care to explain how this congregation came to be here?" Before anyone could answer, a small voice called from the forest edge, "Bear's hurt!" All eyes turned to see Lily, who had squirmed from Mara's arms and now stood at the very edge of the clearing, her tiny figure silhouetted against the darkness of the trees. "Lily, no!" Mara cried, rushing after her daughter, fear clutching at her heart as she saw how close the child was to the wild animals. But Lily showed no fear. She toddled forward with the innocent confidence of a child who didn't recognize danger, making her way directly toward the fallen diamond heart bear and her attendants. The great male bear, still blocking Victor's path, turned his massive head to watch the approaching child. For one heart-stopping moment, Mara was certain he would charge. All bears, even the most gentle, were protective of their injured. But instead, the enormous creature lowered himself to all fours and moved aside, creating a path for Lily to reach the wounded matriarch. The wildlife officers stood frozen in disbelief, their tranquilizer guns half raised but unused, as they watched a human toddler walk unharmed through a gathering of predators that should, by all natural law, have seen her as prey. Mara followed more cautiously, her heart in her throat as she watched her daughter approach the injured bear. Dr. Chen fell into step beside her, her professional demeanor momentarily abandoned in the face of what they were witnessing. "This isn't possible," the biologist whispered. "The statistical probability of a child that age surviving even one encounter with a wild bear, let alone—" Her voice trailed off as she watched Lily reach the Diamond Heart's side. The elderly bear and her companions paused in their ministrations, watching with intelligent eyes as the human child knelt beside their wounded leader. Lily placed her small hand gently on the Diamond Heart's side, feeling the shallow rise and fall of her breathing. Then, with solemn purpose, the child began to make a series of soft sounds. Not bear calls this time, but something more complex, almost musical in its cadence. As Lily sang, something remarkable happened. The wounded bear's breathing deepened and strengthened. Her massive body, which had lain so still, shifted slightly. And then, to the amazement of everyone watching, her eyes, those deep, intelligent eyes that had regarded Lily with such connection just days ago, slowly opened. "That's impossible, Doctor," Chen murmured. "Those gunshot wounds." But the evidence was before them. The Diamond Heart Bear was awake, her gaze fixed on the tiny human child who continued to make those strange, musical sounds beside her. With painful effort, the great bear lifted her head, nosing gently at Lily's hand in what could only be described as recognition and gratitude. From the edge of the clearing, Victor Blackwood watched with a mixture of fear and calculating greed. The terror of moments ago was gradually being replaced by the recognition that he was witnessing something of immense value. A human child who could apparently communicate with and influence wild animals, even bring them back from the brink of death. Such a gift would be worth millions to someone who knew how to exploit it. Carefully, trying not to draw the attention of the assembled creatures, Victor reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew his smartphone. With trembling fingers, he activated the video recording and pointed it toward Lily and the bears. Sheriff Collins, however, had not forgotten Victor's presence. He noticed the movement and recognized the predatory gleam in the man's eyes. With swift strides, he crossed to Victor's side and clamped a hand over the phone, pushing it down. "That's enough," he said firmly. "Put it away." Victor's face contorted with anger. "You have no right," he hissed. "This is a public space, and I'm documenting a natural phenomenon." "This is a crime scene," the sheriff countered, "and I have every right to prevent evidence tampering." As the men argued in hushed, heated tones, Dr. Chen had approached the wounded bear, her scientific curiosity overcoming her natural caution. She knelt beside Lily, examining the Diamond Heart's injuries with professional detachment. "The wounds are less severe than they appeared," she said with surprise. "The bullets seem to have passed through muscle tissue without hitting any vital organs. She's lost blood, but with proper treatment." She glanced at the elderly bear, who continued to lick the wounds with methodical care. "Well, with the treatment she's receiving, she has a good chance of recovery." Mara had joined them now, her maternal fear giving way to wonder as she watched her daughter interact with the wounded bear. Lily was stroking the Diamond Heart's massive head with her tiny hand, still making those strange musical sounds that seemed to soothe the injured animal. "What is she doing?" Mara asked softly. "That's not bear language." Dr. Chen shook her head, her scientific mind clearly struggling with what she was witnessing. "I don't know. It's almost like vibration therapy. Some frequencies can promote healing, stimulate tissue regeneration." She trailed off, aware of how inadequate such explanations were in the face of what was happening before them. Eleanor had approached as well, moving slowly and respectfully past the assembled animals who watched her with alert but non-threatening attention. The old stories called it the healing song. The elderly woman said quietly, "A gift given to only the most powerful speaker children, the ability not just to communicate with animals, but to heal them through sound." Dr. Chen looked skeptical, but she couldn't deny the evidence before her eyes. The diamond heart bear was visibly stronger with each passing minute, her breathing more regular, her gaze more alert. A commotion from the far side of the clearing drew their attention. The wildlife officers had approached the cage containing the adolescent bear and were working to open it, their movements careful and deliberate under the watchful eyes of the assembled Diamond Heart clan. "We're going to release it," one of the officers called to Dr. Chen, "unless you advise otherwise." The biologist nodded her approval. "Release it. These bears came for their family member. We should honor that." As the cage door swung open, the young bear hesitated, clearly traumatized by its capture. Then Lily made another sound, a gentle, encouraging call that seemed to give the frightened animal courage. It emerged cautiously, then bounded across the clearing to join its relatives, pressing close to one of the adult females who greeted it with obvious relief. During this touching reunion, no one noticed Victor Blackwood slipping away from the sheriff's side, edging toward where Mara knelt with Lily beside the diamond heart bear. His face was set with determined calculation, his mind clearly working through the possibilities that Lily's gift presented. The great male bear saw him, though. With a warning grunt, the massive creature moved to intercept Victor, placing his bulk between the man and the vulnerable child. Victor froze, his face once again pale with fear as he found himself confronted by the enormous predator. But this time, something in him snapped. The repeated thwarting of his plans, the loss of the valuable diamond heart pelt, the escape of the adolescent bear. It all culminated in a surge of reckless rage that overcame his survival instinct. "Get out of my way, you stupid animal," he shouted, pulling a handgun from inside his jacket, a weapon he hadn't surrendered when the sheriff confiscated the rifles. Time seemed to slow as several things happened at once. Sheriff Collins shouted a warning, lunging toward Victor. The wildlife officers raised their tranquilizer guns. Mara threw herself protectively over Lily, and the diamond heart bear, with strength that should have been impossible given her wounded state, surged to her feet with a roar that seemed to shake the very ground. Victor fired, the shot going wild as his arm was jostled by the sheriff's leap. The bullet whined harmlessly into the trees, but the damage was done. The delicate balance that had held the assembly of predators in check was shattered by the sound of the gunshot and the threat to their wounded leader. What followed should have been a bloodbath, a frenzied attack by over a dozen bears, wolves, and other predators on the humans who had invaded their territory and harmed one of their own. But what happened instead defied all natural law and human expectation. Lily, wriggling free from her mother's protective embrace, stood up and made a sharp, commanding sound, a call unlike any she had made before. The simple authority in that small voice froze every creature in the clearing, predator and human alike. In the sudden silence that followed, Lily toddled forward, placing herself between Victor and the animals. She made another series of sounds, complex, musical, yet clearly communicating something of vital importance to the assembled creatures. The response was immediate and astonishing. The great male bear lowered himself to a sitting position, though his watchful eyes never left Victor. The other bears followed suit, settling back or sitting on their haunches. Even the wolves and mountain lions seemed to respond to Lily's command, their aggressive postures softening though they remained alert. "What's happening?" Dr. Chen whispered, her scientific detachment completely abandoned in the face of what they were witnessing. Eleanor's wrinkled face shone with a mixture of tears and reverence. "She's establishing peace," the old woman said softly. "She's telling them not to attack, even though they have every right to." Sheriff Collins had wrestled the gun from Victor's hand and now held the struggling man firmly. "That child just saved your worthless life," he grunted, tightening his grip as Victor continued to fight. "Show some gratitude by shutting up and standing still." But Victor was beyond reason. "You don't understand what you're throwing away," he shouted, his face contorted with frustrated greed. "That child is worth millions, billions, the ability to control wild animals. Do you have any idea what governments would pay for that? What militaries around the world would give to harness that power?" His words hung in the air, revealing the true depth of his corrupt ambition. It wasn't just about exotic animals for his exhibition anymore. It was about weaponizing Lily's gift, turning a child's connection with nature into a tool for domination and destruction. The diamond heart bear, still standing despite her injuries, made a low rumbling sound. Not a threat, but something that sounded almost like sorrow. She looked at Lily, then at Victor, and there was such clear understanding in her gaze that even the most skeptical observer would have been hard-pressed to deny the intelligence behind those dark eyes. Lily turned to the great bear and made another series of soft sounds, placing her small hand on the bear's massive paw in a gesture of connection. Then she looked at Victor, her innocent face somehow both childlike and ancient, as she regarded the man who would have exploited her gift for dark purposes. "Bad man," she said clearly, one of the few human phrases in her limited vocabulary. "Go way." Dr. Chen stepped forward, her professional manner reasserting itself as she addressed the wildlife officers. "I want this man charged with illegal discharge of a firearm in a protected wildlife area, attempted poaching of a protected species, animal cruelty, and reckless endangerment." She glanced at Sheriff Collins. "I believe you can add assault with a deadly weapon and a few other charges?" The sheriff nodded grimly, tightening his handcuffs around Victor's wrists. "With pleasure." As Victor was led away, still shouting about missed opportunities and the value of Lily's gift, Dr. Chen turned her attention to the wounded diamond heart bear. Despite the animal's remarkable recovery, she clearly needed medical attention. "We need to sedate her and transport her to a wildlife rehabilitation facility," the biologist said, reaching for her medical kit. But Eleanor placed a restraining hand on her arm. "No," the old woman said firmly. "These bears don't belong in human facilities. They need to remain free." Dr. Chen frowned. "That bear has multiple gunshot wounds. She needs surgery, antibiotics, proper care." "She has proper care," Eleanor insisted, gesturing to the other bears who had never left their leader's side. "They've been treating her, and with Lily's help." She hesitated, aware of how outlandish her words must sound to the scientist. With Lily's help, she's already healing faster than should be possible. The diamond heart bear settled back to the ground, clearly exhausted by her brief standing. But her eyes remained alert, fixed on the humans with clear intelligence as they debated her fate. Mara, who had been silently observing, spoke up. "What if we compromise?" she suggested. "What if Dr. Chen treats the bear here, now, with whatever field medicine is possible, and then we let the diamond hearts take her back to their territory? We could monitor her recovery from a distance, intervene only if necessary." Dr. Chen looked skeptical but thoughtful. "That's highly unorthodox," she said slowly. "But then, everything about this situation is unorthodox." She glanced at the assembled bears, who watched her with unnervingly human-like attention. "I suppose I could administer antibiotics, clean and suture the wounds as best I can in field conditions." Lily made a soft, encouraging sound, reaching out to touch Dr. Chen's hand with her small fingers. The gesture was so human, so normal, after all the otherworldly communication they had witnessed, that it seemed to break through the biologist's scientific reserve. "All right," Dr. Chen agreed, with a small smile for the child. "We'll try it your way." What followed was perhaps the strangest medical procedure ever performed in the history of wildlife biology. Under the watchful eyes of over a dozen bears, wolves, and other predators, Dr. Chen carefully cleaned and treated the diamond heart bear's wounds, administering antibiotics and pain medication while explaining each step to Lily, as if the child were a medical student observing a procedure. And in a way, it seemed that Lily was indeed learning. She watched with solemn attention, occasionally making soft sounds to the injured bear that seemed to keep her calm during the more painful aspects of the treatment. The other animals maintained their vigil, never threatening, never interfering, but clearly monitoring every move the humans made. "When the treatment was complete, Doctor." Chen stepped back, wiping her brow with a mixture of exhaustion and wonder. "That's all I can do," she said quietly. "The rest is up to her own healing abilities, and whatever help her family can provide." As if understanding her words, the elderly bear, who had first begun treating the diamond heart, moved forward and resumed her gentle licking of the now sutured wounds, working carefully around the bandages Dr. Chen had applied. "Remarkable," the biologist murmured. "They really do understand." The night had grown old, the first hint of dawn lightening the eastern sky. The wildlife officers had established a perimeter around the clearing, keeping the curious at bay as word of the extraordinary events had begun to spread through Pine Hollow. Victor Blackwood had been taken to the county jail, his protests falling on increasingly unsympathetic ears as the full extent of his activities came to light. Lily, exhausted by the night's events, had finally fallen asleep in Mara's arms, her small face peaceful despite the drama that still surrounded them. The child had done something impossible tonight, something that defied scientific explanation and vindicated the ancient stories Eleanor had grown up hearing. She had called the creatures of the forest to stand as one. She had helped heal a mortally wounded bear. She had prevented bloodshed when all natural instinct called for violence. And she had done it all with the simple, pure-hearted innocence of a child who didn't yet know that such things were supposed to be impossible. As the diamond heart bears prepared to return to the forest, taking their wounded leader with them, Dr. Chen approached Mara with an expression of profound respect. "I don't know what to make of all this," she admitted quietly. "My scientific training tells me there must be rational explanations. Heightened sensitivity to animal vocalizations, some form of emergent language capability, perhaps even pheromone communication that we're not detecting." She glanced at Lily's sleeping form. "But my instincts tell me it's something more, something we may never fully understand or quantify." Mara nodded, stroking her daughter's soft hair. "Does it matter what we call it? Gift or mutation, miracle or science, she can communicate with them, she can help them, and they recognize her as special." "Special," Dr. Chen echoed thoughtfully. "Yes, that's certainly true." She hesitated, then continued with careful words. "You realize, of course, that others will come. Victor Blackwood won't be the last person to see the potential of Lily's abilities. There will be scientists, governments, military interests, people with motives both benign and dangerous." A chill ran through Mara at the truth of these words. Tonight's events had protected Lily from immediate threat, but they had also revealed her gift to the world in a way that couldn't be undone. The road ahead would be filled with those who would try to study, exploit, or control her daughter's extraordinary abilities. "What do we do?" she asked softly, the weight of responsibility heavy on her shoulders. Eleanor, who had been listening quietly, placed a comforting hand on Mara's arm. "We protect her," the old woman said simply. "We teach her. We let her grow into her gift at her own pace, guided by those who care for her well-being rather than what she can do for them." She glanced toward the forest edge, where the Diamond Heart Bears were gathering around their wounded leader. "And we remember that she has protectors beyond just us." As if confirming Eleanor's words, the great male bear paused at the forest's edge, turning his massive head to look back at the sleeping child. There was something in that gaze, something that transcended the normal boundaries between human and animal consciousness. A recognition, a promise. Then, with a soft grunt that seemed almost like a farewell, he disappeared into the shelter of the ancient trees, followed by the rest of his clan, carefully supporting their wounded matriarch. The other forest creatures melted away as well, returning to their solitary lives until the next time the speaker child called them to stand as one. As the sun rose over Pine Hollow, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Mara knew that life would never be the same. Not for her, not for Lily, and perhaps not for the relationship between humans and the wild creatures with whom they shared the earth. But as she held her sleeping daughter close, feeling the gentle rhythm of her breathing, Mara found herself filled with a strange hope. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever forces might seek to exploit Lily's gift, there was something profound and ancient awakening in the world. A remembering of connections long forgotten, a healing of divisions long established. And it had all begun with the impossible courage of a baby who had heard the suffering of a bear cub locked in a freezer truck and had refused to look away. 5 years passed in Pine Hollow, seasons turning like pages in nature's book. The incident with the Diamond Heart Bears had not been forgotten, but life in the small town had found a new rhythm, one that honored the delicate balance between the human world and the wilderness that surrounded it. Lily Winters had grown from a toddler into a spirited 6-year-old with bright eyes that seemed to hold wisdom far beyond her years. Her gift had not diminished with age. If anything, it had deepened, becoming more nuanced and controlled. She no longer called out in perfect bear vocalizations unless she chose to, but the connection remained, flowing between her and the creatures of the forest like an invisible current. On this particular autumn morning, golden light filtered through trees ablaze with red and orange as Lily walked beside her mother on a narrow forest trail. The path had been worn smooth over the years by their regular pilgrimages to a special clearing deep within the Diamond Heart Bear's territory. "Do you think they'll be there today?" Lily asked, her small hand warm in Mara's as they navigated a fallen log. "I think so," Mara replied with a smile. "They always seem to know when you're coming." It was true. No matter when they visited the clearing, the Diamond Heart Bears invariably appeared, as if some silent message traveled ahead of them through the ancient trees. Behind them walked Dr. Helena Chen, carrying a backpack filled with scientific equipment. Over the years, she had become both colleague and friend. Her initial skepticism transformed into a profound respect for the phenomenon she still couldn't fully explain with science. "The recordings from the acoustic monitors have been extraordinary," the biologist said as they walked. "The vocalization patterns are becoming more complex each month. It's as if they're developing a more sophisticated language specifically to communicate with Lily." "Or remembering one they once had," suggested Eleanor Blackwood, who despite her advancing years still insisted on making the journey to the clearing whenever Lily visited. The old woman moved more slowly now, leaning on a carved walking stick, but her eyes remained bright with the fire of someone who had seen ancient stories come to life. A rustling in the undergrowth ahead made them pause. Lily lifted her head, listening with that peculiar focus that always preceded the bear's arrival. Then a smile broke across her face. "Diamond is coming," she said, using the name she had given to the matriarch bear years ago. "And she's brought the new cubs." Sure enough, moments later, the unmistakable form of the Diamond Heart bear emerged onto the path. She was older now, her muzzle showing touches of gray, and the scars from the bullet wounds were still visible as hairless patches in her thick fur. But she moved with the same power and dignity that had always defined her, her dark eyes bright with intelligence as she spotted the human visitors. Behind her came two smaller bears, cubs born the previous spring, now chubby with the fat that would sustain them through their first winter hibernation. They bounced along playfully, occasionally standing on hind legs to bat at falling leaves. "Remarkable," Dr. Chen murmured, instinctively reaching for her camera before stopping herself. Early in their research, they had established strict protocols. No photographs, no recordings without explicit purpose. No treating the bears as specimens rather than partners in an extraordinary relationship. Lily released her mother's hand and stepped forward, making a soft greeting sound that was neither fully human nor fully bear, but something in between. A bridge between species that only she could create. Diamond responded with a similar sound, approaching with the confidence of a creature who knew she had nothing to fear from these particular humans. When she reached Lily, the great bear lowered her massive head, allowing the child to place her small hands on either side of her muzzle in a gesture of connection that still brought tears to Mara's eyes, no matter how many times she witnessed it. "She says the forest is changing," Lily translated, her head tilted as if listening to words only she could hear. "More humans are coming to the mountains. Some are good, some don't understand." Dr. Chen nodded, making notes in the small book she always carried. The bear's assessment aligned perfectly with the data her department had been gathering. Tourism in the region had increased dramatically, driven partly by rumors of the bear whisperer child, despite the protective anonymity the town had tried to maintain around Lily. "Ask her if her family has enough space, enough food," the biologist suggested. Lily made another series of sounds, more complex than the simple bear calls she had first mimicked as a baby. This was the language that had evolved between them over the years, not just imitation, but true communication. Diamond responded with a rumbling vocalization, occasionally gesturing with her massive head toward the mountains to the north. "She says they're moving deeper into the mountains during the busy seasons," Lily reported, "but they always return to their home territory when the cold comes." The child frowned slightly. "She's worried about the big machines that are coming, the ones that tear at the earth." Eleanor's face darkened with concern. "Logging equipment," she said grimly. "Victor's cousin Owen has been lobbying to open parts of the national forest to selective harvesting." Though Victor Blackwood remained in prison, serving time for multiple wildlife violations and the attempted murder of a protected species, his family's influence in the region had not diminished. They had merely become more subtle in their approach to exploiting the natural resources of Pine Hollow. "The conservation easement protects most of the Diamond Heart territory," Dr. Chen assured them. "But we'll need to monitor the situation closely." As the adults discussed the potential threat, Lily had moved on to greeting the cubs, who approached her with the curious boldness of youth. Unlike their mother, these cubs had never known a world where humans were solely a threat. They had been born into the new relationship that Lily had helped create, one of cautious trust and mutual respect. "This one is called Bright Star," Lily said, gently stroking the smaller cub's fur. And the bigger one is Thunderfoot, she giggled, because he walks so loud that all the deer run away before he can see them. Mara watched her daughter with a mixture of pride and wonder that had never diminished. Lily's gift remained extraordinary, but what truly amazed her was the child's character, her sense of responsibility, her deep empathy, her understanding that her abilities connected her to the natural world in ways that created obligation as well as opportunity. They had worked hard to ensure that Lily grew up with normal childhood experiences, despite her unusual abilities. She attended the local school, had friends her own age, played games, and threw occasional tantrums like any 6-year-old. But there was always this other side to her life. These regular journeys into the forest, this ongoing conversation with creatures that most humans never truly understood. Dr. Chen had become their ally and protector in the scientific community, carefully controlling what information was released about Lily's abilities. There had been papers published, of course. The scientific value of Lily's communication with the bears was too significant to ignore completely. But they were written with careful anonymity, never naming the child or the exact location, focusing on the larger implications for conservation and interspecies communication rather than sensationalizing Lily herself. Still, rumors had spread. There had been visitors to Pine Hollow asking questions, journalists seeking the Bear Girl, even a few government representatives hinting at national security applications for Lily's abilities. Each time, the community had closed ranks around them, protecting their own with the fierce loyalty of a bear clan. Sheriff Collins had established a rotation of deputies to keep watch over the winter's home. Dr. Chen had secured special protected status for the entire watershed that included the Diamond Heart territory. And the bears themselves had become more visible around the edges of Mara's property, as if maintaining their own form of security. As the morning progressed, more bears joined them in the clearing. The elderly female who had first helped treat Diamond's wounds, now moving with the stiffness of great age. The massive male who had confronted Victor, still powerful but mellower with the passing years, and several younger bears who had been cubs themselves when Lily first demonstrated her remarkable gift. Lily moved among them with complete confidence, occasionally translating their communications for the benefit of the humans. They spoke of berry patches and salmon runs, of a cougar family that had moved into the eastern valley, of strange machines that had been heard near the old logging road. Ordinary concerns of the forest dwellers, shared with their extraordinary human interpreter. Dr. Chen continued taking notes, her scientific objectivity softened by years of witnessing the undeniable intelligence and emotional complexity of these creatures. She had become one of the world's foremost advocates for reconsidering how humans classified and interacted with large predators, her work informed by the unique window Lily provided into their consciousness. As the sun climbed higher, warming the clearing, Eleanor settled on a fallen log, her aged face serene as she watched the scene before her. The old stories had been proven true in her lifetime. A speaker child had come, bridging worlds that had grown too far apart. She had lived to see ancient wisdom vindicated by a small girl with simple courage and an open heart. "It's time," the old woman said suddenly, her voice carrying a certainty that drew everyone's attention. Mara turned to her with concern. "Time for what, Eleanor?" "Time for the ceremony," Eleanor replied, her eyes bright with purpose. "The promising. It should have been done years ago, but I wanted to wait until Lily was old enough to choose for herself." Dr. Chen looked puzzled. "What ceremony?" Eleanor reached into the small bag she carried and withdrew a bundle wrapped in soft deerskin. In the old stories, when a speaker child reached the age of understanding, they would be formally recognized by both the human community and the animal clans they communicated with. She unwrapped the bundle, revealing a necklace made of carved wood, stone beads, and, in the center, a perfect white diamond-shaped stone. This has been in my family for generations, waiting for a true speaker to wear it. Lily approached, drawn by the gleaming stone that so perfectly matched the marking on the diamond heart bears. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's yours," Eleanor said softly, "if you choose to accept the responsibility that comes with it." Mara felt a stir of concern. What responsibility? Eleanor's eyes were gentle but serious. To stand between worlds, to speak for those who cannot speak to humans in their own voices, to remember the old connections when others forget. She looked directly at Lily. It is a path of joy, but also of challenge. Not everyone will understand or accept your gift. Some will fear it. Others will try to use it for their own purposes. Lily considered this with a gravity beyond her years, her young face solemn as she glanced between the necklace and the bears who watched from the edges of the clearing. "I already do those things," she said finally, with the simple directness of a child. "I help the bears talk to people. I tell Dr. Chen when the forest is sick. I try to stop the bad machines from hurting the trees." She reached out to touch the white stone. "This would just make it official, right?" Eleanor smiled. "Yes, little one, it would make it official." Diamond, who had been listening to this exchange with evident interest, approached slowly. The great bear made a soft sound, nudging Lily gently with her massive head in what appeared to be encouragement. "Diamond says the stone belongs to both worlds," Lily translated. "It came from the mountains, but was shaped by human hands." She looked up at Eleanor. "She says it's like me." Mara felt tears welling in her eyes at the simple truth of this observation. Lily did indeed belong to both worlds, born human but blessed, or burdened, with the ability to transcend the boundaries that separated humanity from the wild creatures with whom they shared the earth. "The choice must be yours," Mara told her daughter softly. "Now and always." Lily looked around the clearing, at her mother who had protected and nurtured her gift, at Eleanor who had recognized and validated it through ancient wisdom, at Dr. Chen who had helped explain and defend it through modern science, and at the bears who had accepted and responded to it with their own form of understanding. Then, with the straightforward certainty that children sometimes possess in moments of importance, she nodded. "I choose yes," she said simply. Eleanor's gnarled hands shook slightly with emotion as she placed the necklace over Lily's head. The white diamond stone gleamed against the child's chest, catching the sunlight and seeming to glow with an inner light of its own. As the old woman stepped back, something remarkable happened. Diamond approached Lily once more, this time rising briefly to her hind legs, not in threat, but in what could only be described as ceremony. The great bear made a series of sounds that carried through the clearing with undeniable authority. Around the edges, the other bears responded, their voices joining in what sounded almost like a song. Lily listened, her face alight with wonder, then turned to translate for the humans. But before she could speak, something even more extraordinary occurred. The forest around them seemed to come alive with sound. Not just the bears now, but birds calling from the trees, wolves howling in the distance, the chatter of squirrels and the distant bugling of elk. A chorus of wild voices acknowledging what was taking place in the small clearing. For a breathtaking moment, it was as if the veil between worlds had thinned to transparency, revealing the complex web of communication and consciousness that had always existed in the natural world, waiting only for human ears to evolve enough to hear it. Dr. Chen stood transfixed, her scientific equipment forgotten, as she witnessed something that defied all conventional understanding of animal behavior. Eleanor wept openly, ancient stories coming to life before her eyes. And Mara watched her daughter, her miraculous, ordinary, extraordinary daughter. Standing at the center of it all, a small human child with a bear's voice and a heart big enough to bridge worlds. When the wild chorus finally faded, Lily turned to her mother with shining eyes. "They said I'm a keeper of promises," she translated softly. "Promises between their people and our people. Old promises that were forgotten but not broken." "What promises?" Mara asked, her voice hushed with wonder. Lily placed her small hand on the white stone at her throat. "To remember that we share the earth, to listen before we act, to protect what is precious." She looked up at her mother with perfect seriousness. "To never lock bear cubs in freezer trucks." A startled laugh escaped Mara at this last addition, breaking the solemn tension of the moment. Even the bears seemed to respond, the cubs tumbling playfully as if released from ceremony back into the ordinary joy of life. As they prepared to leave the clearing, Diamond approached Mara directly, something the Great Bear rarely did, usually focusing her interaction on Lily. The bear's intelligent eyes met the human mother's, and in that gaze Mara felt a profound communication that needed no translation. Gratitude from one mother to another for nurturing a gift that had changed both their worlds. Mara nodded in acknowledgement, reaching out slowly to touch the bear's massive shoulder in a gesture of respect. "We'll protect her," she promised quietly, "and she'll protect all of you." Diamond huffed softly in what seemed like agreement, before turning to lead her family back into the depths of the forest. One by one, the bears followed, occasionally looking back at the small gathering of humans until they had all disappeared among the ancient trees. As they made their own way back toward town, Lily walked with a new confidence, occasionally touching the white stone that gleamed against her chest. She had taken a step today, not just into an ancient tradition, but into a future that would be shaped by the bridges she built between worlds that had grown too far apart. The path ahead would not be easy. There would be those who feared her gift, those who sought to exploit it, those who denied its reality, and those who recognized its profound importance for a world where humans had forgotten how to listen to the voices of other beings. But Lily would not walk that path alone. She had her mother's fierce love, Eleanor's ancient wisdom, Dr. Chen's scientific advocacy, the protection of an entire community, and the watchful guidance of the Diamond Heart Bears. Together, they would navigate the challenges ahead, seeking a future where the boundary between human and wild became not a barrier but a meeting place, a shared space of mutual respect and understanding. And it had all begun on a cold gray day with a simple act of compassion. A baby who heard the suffering of a bear cub locked in a freezer truck and did the impossible to save it. Sometimes the smallest actions change the world in ways we never imagine. Sometimes the most important gifts come in the most unexpected packages. And sometimes, just sometimes, a child's innocent courage can heal wounds that have separated worlds for generations. Lily's small fingers closed around the white diamond stone, warm now from resting against her heart. In the distance, a bear called. A single, melodious note that carried through the autumn air like a promise. She smiled and called back, her voice creating a bridge between worlds with each word she spoke.